Welcome to Busybody Podcast. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
My pleasure, Cadence.
So I was speaking today with Seven Song. Would you like to introduce yourself, because you are quite renowned, but I'm sure you're going to be humble.
Hi, I'm Seven Song.
How long have you been practicing herbal medicine?
Practicing is a tricky question. I've been studying herbal medicine since 1980.
How would you describe your career then?
Oh, my career. Wow.
I guess what I'm thinking is I have a feeling that my audience, like a lot of people, is sort of split between people who understand something about herbal medicine and people who have no clue someone like you could even exist.
Well, the reality is I am an AI of a 1970s hippie age to look 65 years old. So all my answers are basically going to be mythopoetic AI. Basically, I'm a kid from the Long Island suburbs, and I grew up in the suburbs. There's a strip of woods between houses and major highways, and so I would spend a lot of time there. So I think I've always just been interested in nature. It's just maybe it's 20-foot strip. Nobody's supposed to go there because then you're right next to the highway. But I would go look for salamanders and turtles. I really was not as interested in plants until I was in my early 20s. Before then, probably my greatest science, or my greatest love of science, was herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians. And then I just, I think coming in, hearing about psychedelic plants, not that I was much of a user, but I just kept hearing weird stuff, morning rose. Anyway, I got a book called Natural Psychedelics or something, and I just became interested. The book is, I bought another copy just a few years ago to look at it. It's kind of, it's just inaccurate. It has like catnip in there, Damiana, plants that clearly are just mild nervines rather than sedatives. But by my early 20s, 22, 23, 24, I did start getting really interested in herbal medicine. And then kind of fortuitously, I came upon the California School of Herbal Studies booth at the Oregon Country Fair in the early 80s, and decided that I would go there and take their class. So that would have been 1983. I am hopscotching a little bit.
Yeah.
In 1981, I actually went to my first herb school in Santa Cruz, California, which was the Platonic Academy of Herbal Studies. Named after Plato, rather than the idea of Platonic. The guy who started the school, I hadn't seen him since, but he just recently died. A man named Paul Lee. So to put it more in a timeline, so in 1981, I went to my first herb school while living in Santa Cruz out of an interest. I went to the Oregon Country Fair and saw the California School of Herbal Studies booth. I did a work study, which is what I did most of my early life in order to learn about herbs. And then I went to the California School in 1983. And I learned a bunch. So that's the question I like. So while I started knowing about herbs, it would be much later until I really had a handle on practice. But once I became interested, I stayed with it. So I would say easily since the early 80s, I've had a very steady, mostly teaching myself about plants and plant medicines. By plants, meaning learning botany and how to identify plants properly. And in 1994, in 1995, I studied and taught botany for Michael Moore. That's just a handy thing for people who are interested. Like, one of the ways that I've helped myself without having to spend a lot of money was becoming good in certain aspects and then doing work trades to go to schools. It's also, the landscape is very different. Back then, as far as kind of white herbal schools, there was just a few. Culturally, herbal medicine was being practiced everywhere, but I was mainstream side of it. So I studied with Michael Moore for 94 and 95 and taught botany at his school. And he was very fundamental to my understanding of herbal medicine in that he's a science believer. And so am I. And so the problem I've had then and still is there are many ways to approach herbal medicine. One approach is definitely from a spiritual or cultural corridor. I have friends like in the Onondaga Nation, and for many of them, they also know science, but also it's a very powerful and it's a very important part of their culture. But for me, that part, the spirituality, has never been strong. It's never really been an interest, frankly. So just to put my nationality in here. So I'm a Russian Jew from New York. Most of my grandparents immigrated from Russia and that part of the world. But science has always been the way that I have viewed things. And so I just kept studying. But Michael Moore, really, he just showed me the validity of science. Everybody else just seemed to have very strong spiritual connections to herbal medicine, which was not as easy for me to grasp because that's not the way that I tend to view the world. So that was 94, 95. And then I just kept studying. I also went back to teach for him a few more times. But those are the only schools I've ever been to. Since then, I've gone to conferences pretty continually, and sometimes I go to classes, but generally I go to conferences to hang out with friends. Yeah. So I don't know if that really defines any of the question that you asked me.
I think it does in terms of the breadth of your knowledge. And I think that part about being led from science is really interesting. So I remember, full disclosure for our audience, I took your course now many years ago, I think in 2014. I took the 8-month program. And I think what made your program seem unique, or your practice unique, when I was looking around, is that you are very clinically focused, as in working directly with people and, being able to actually serve people and create herbal medicine, or, help people directly, as opposed to just making things to sell them or making things for yourself. At least that's what it felt like to me. And I also appreciated your kind of science approach to things. One of the questions that you asked us on the very first day, and definitely correct me because I'm sure I'm going to rephrase it, is why is herbal medicine important, or why should we have herbal medicine? And everybody gave very passionate answers, a lot of which were that it seems safer or gentler. But can you say what your answer is to that?
So the question is a little bit different. The question is, why do we need herbal medicine in the current paradigm of medicine that we live in? Because historically we needed herbal medicine because no other medicine existed. And now with biotechnology and the new biologic drugs and just a host of medicines, why is herbal medicine relevant currently? And I find that first thing, I think it's just a good question. I think because herbal medicine has been sidelined, that there's a tendency to push back. And so the answer is just because. But actually, it's a reasonably good question. Why is herbal medicine relevant in today's modern medicine, in just today? About and I don't really know. I don't have the same answers as most folks. I think probably the best reason is because diversity increases functionality, right? So here's a thought experiment. So basically herbal medicine was pretty strong till about 1910. It was already the medical community was already doing their thing. And it's not entirely the medical community. I mean, people turned to modern medicine. I mean, I'm not sure they could have just done it on their own. Modern medicine people were enthralled by it because it was saving lives. But if we thought about it differently, we said instead of the Flexner report, which came out around 1920, what if herbal medicine just paralleled modern medicine? What if we just kept learning more about it? We would know so much more about plants and their value. And so one of the major reasons for me that herbal medicine is important is that it doesn't shut a door to a whole other paradigm of medicine. So but for me, that's just really important. I mean, I'm a botanist. I'm a plant gatherer. I make my own medicines. Behind me, there's hundreds of different tinctures. But I don't think that's the answer, because working in a free clinic, the majority of people I work with will never make their own medicines, nor should they. That's like expecting me to learn how to fix my own car, right? So just because it's possible for most people, it's not going to have to, first, if their body's hurt, gathering medicines can be difficult. They'll have to learn how to proper identification. They have to live in a place where plants are available and not in an urban environment. So often the answer is because we can make our own medicines. Some of us can make our own medicines and share them. But I think the best reason for herbal medicine to exist is just because there is so much more we can learn from it. And by it, I don't mean just the chemicals extracted from it. I mean whole plant materials. Mm-hmm. The other reason is people really like it. I mean, there's no reason to not use it if it's done reasonably, responsibly, by herbalists and by people taking it, plants. I think there's just another avenue. It can be safer, but not all herbs are safe. And basically what's happened is like the popular herbs, like if you went to Mountain Rose and bought herbs, they don't sell poisonous herbs.
Right.
So it's not that herbs are not dangerous, it's that we've taken them out, where modern medicines have many dangerous drugs in them, but that's also because they're very strong and they're also regulated. I mean, well, I can see what's happening with the, unregulated dangerous drugs these days, and how dangerous they can be. But let me, that's a digression. What we really want is a diversity of different kinds of medicines, including, of course, modern medicines, pharmacology and drugs and surgery and radiation. And all these things they're in their infancy, right? I mean, like the way that we use radiation 20, 50 years from now, it'll be very different. I'll be much more successful. So I wouldn't want to shut those avenues down either. And I think all of us know people who are alive because of modern medicine. But because that works well, there's no reason to sideline herbal medicine, which also has plenty of benefits and tends to be better at maintaining rather than just killing stuff or really altering our bodies in kind of massive physiological consequences, like many drugs can.
That's a great point, too. I think often modern medicine is very symptom focused in terms of just like remove the symptom. Don't as long as you don't feel this pain, this ache, this dizziness, whatever, problem solved, even if the underlying condition is not actually being addressed. And herbal medicine seems to often have more of a tonic focus, where you're actually trying to shift the body subtly and try and figure out what's going on, and then hopefully those symptoms resolve, which also seems useful.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'm preparing to go to the Rainbow Gathering, which I've been doing for about 30 years. But actually, when I'm there, I work at a first aid station. We're just trying to treat symptoms.
Right.
We're trying to diarrhea. We're trying to treat bug bites. I mean, I also have a bunch of drugs with me along with herbs.
That is a fascinating thing. Can you quickly digress to tell us about the first aid work you do? Because I feel like that's something that people don't understand. It's possible with herbal medicine, that it can be this on the spot emergency treatment. I think a lot of people's experience of herbal medicine is like, oh, I take echinacea sometimes in the winter for my immune system, or I take valerian sometimes when I'm stressed out. But there are actually quite fast acting herbs that, you've told us about people who are having kind of psychological events at these gatherings and things that you're able to do to snap them out of things and all kinds of stuff.
Yes. So I agree. Many people wonder about herbal medicine's use in first aid. First aid just means you're just trying to quell the symptoms. I mean, there's no real definition. First aid is, here it is, I'm just trying to deal with it, rather than if I'm in the clinic and I'm working with somebody and seeing what we can do for long-term health. But realistically, first aid is what every animal knows, right? I mean, not just humans, right? Other animals know if they get injured, they can eat a plant. I mean, I don't really know that much about plants, animals, and the way that they treat themselves. But what I do mean to say is, before we look like Homo sapien, before we look like Homo whatever before us, I mean, way back when we were certainly much more jungle living and not modern, we still use plants for first aid. I mean, it's just absolutely not modern. So, but somehow that part has died out. I think partly because modern medicine actually does a fairly good job of first aid. So when I go to these events, we just treat whatever is coming by. They could be street medic events if there's a protest. They could be, the one I'm going to now is a wilderness event where we're off the grid for about a week and a half. And so I just bring lots and lots and lots of herbs, but also things like medical tape and, we also have NSAIDs. But the majority of stuff I bring are tinctures, some glycerites, some capsules and powders to treat people. There's a lot you can do. There's only a few herbs that really snap people out of things really quickly. A lot of them just do what drugs do. Which, if somebody has a lot of diarrhea, it will still take them 1 or 2 days, depending on what the infectious agent is, to help them. But herbs can be very effective there.
Well, I'll never forget. I had basically thrown my back out in one way or another many years ago. And I was begging you. I was up there and I was like, my back hurts so much. I'm in such horrible pain. And you gave me something that I drink and it stopped right away.
Sometimes you get it. So, I mean, herbs do have their potency. And of course, the more knowledgeable you are about herbal medicine, and then, I mean, it's really helpful to have a really large apothecary down so that I could mix and match stuff.
Yeah, your 7 Songs Home, it does look like a amazing sort of medieval wizard's cave in some ways, with just jars and jars of all kinds of things.
Science wizard.
Exactly, science wizard. So I wanted to have you on to talk about something that you recently posted about on your Instagram, and it's a topic that I have never forgotten from your program. So I took your program. I don't really practice herbal medicine actively, but I really learned so much about asking people what's wrong with them. That's something that has benefited me ever since then. Really learning how to ask people questions to really get information from them, and not making assumptions about, everything from them saying, I remember you saying something when someone says they're constipated, to literally ask, what does that mean to you? Because to me, maybe that means just not having a bowel movement in one day. Maybe that person, it's 3 days and they feel like they're constipated, or it's not having 3 bowel movements in a day, So not just making an assumption that you understand what it means when someone says, I don't sleep very much or whatever. That's been endlessly helpful to me in my own work. And we were discussing in your class treating depression and anxiety. And you recently posted about adrenal fatigue, and how when we spoke about depression and anxiety, that it's to be careful that if someone is depressed, the instinct would be to give them something that kind of kicks them up and lifts them in some way. But that in many cases, a person's depression is actually their nervous system is so overloaded that it's like inverses, and they appear down, but actually it's almost like an ongoing panic attack. And so you don't want to add another stimulant to that because they're already like at level 100. And then similarly, you were discussing how adrenal fatigue may not have anything to do with the adrenals in some cases, and may also be this kind of overstimulated nervous system. And so the protocol would be different. Am I getting that correct?
Yes. I think you'd be summed up as diagnosis is important. And diagnosis for herbalists and a lot of other less conventional practitioners is more nuanced, I think, than a cardiologist who's going to be very much focused on heart rhythm and less about other aspects. So I think it's just important to know what people's symptoms are. I mean, that's really all I mean by diagnosis. So when somebody says, I'm in pain, what kind of pain and where is the pain? Or exactly what you said, if they have constipation, some people have a bowel movement every 3 to 4 days. And so, constipation for them might be longer, meaning even less bowel movement. So there's often a lot of terminology that doesn't really hold up well. It doesn't really help the person. All right. So let me say this differently. When somebody comes in with a health problem, I don't doubt that they have a health problem. Like there's no they're making this up. This is in their mind, as if the mind is not a part of the body. So that's I am an advocate and agent for my patients, but they might have a diagnosis I feel like is not helpful for them. And adrenal fatigue is one of the most common ones. Many, many, many people feel exhausted all the time. They don't get proper sleep. They wake up feeling unrested. Their food doesn't feel good in their body. They feel drained. Their concentration isn't very strong. Everybody listening to this probably has at least some of their time like this. And many of the people, this will be pretty common. And so the answer to that, not in the medical world, but in the alternative healthcare world, is that their adrenals are fatigued, meaning that their cortisol levels are shot, meaning that the part of their adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidneys, part of that adrenal gland is not producing the right hormones. The reality is, generally, the adrenal gland is working fine. Adrenal fatigue is describing a group of symptoms with exhaustion as one of the main ones. There's no question that the exhaustion exists. The problem is, if you're treating them, is the goal to really try to increase adrenal gland secretions, particularly cortisol, or is your goal to try to make them feel better? And what's the avenues to do that? I mean, they're not separate. I mean, you could want to treat their adrenal glands and, of course, help their symptoms. But the reality is, from my perspective, and for most lab testing, is that their adrenal glands are fine. They're exhausted because they've pushed themselves, and it's their nervous system that needs nourishment. Mm-hmm. So the reason it's important, it's not so much an "I got you" moment, right? That's unimportant and harmful even. The important thing is, what herbs am I going to give them? And so they come in for adrenal fatigue and want herbs like ashwagandha, which may be helpful, or licorice, which often I find less helpful. Is to give them herbs that really nourish the nervous system, like passion flower or blue vervain or wood betony or damiana or oats. There's a lot of plants. Or look at the other aspects in their life and see where you can make subtle changes or big changes that might help, and where maybe they can get better rest or counseling. So with adrenal fatigue, the other one that people often think they have, this is less common now, this comes in waves, and they often think they have parasites. And that's what's causing all their disruptions, their fatigue, their energy loss, their problems with thought. And again, it's often not a specific parasite. I mean, you could have parasites, especially if the person has traveled with new bacteria someplace. But frankly, often, again, there's something else going on. It might be diet related. So I think whenever we sign on to something and think the disease is what we have, it's a possibility, but it's a question. So the other one that's very common for me is Lyme disease. Now, while science says chronic Lyme does not exist, it does exist. I mean, I see it. So I don't really know the pathology. I don't know if it's the spirochete, it's the bacteria, the Borrelia bacteria that's causing it, or some alteration of the body. But I know many people that after getting Lyme, that they've had deterioration. That part, but when it's straightforward, it's easy. Unfortunately, the testing is not very succinct. So when somebody comes in and they say they have Lyme disease, what I want to know is, do they really have Lyme disease? And so the reason for that is I want to make sure that the herbs that I give them are the proper herbs. If they have a bacterial infection, Lyme disease, then they might get a bunch of herbs that kill things, like myrrh or Oregon grapefruit. If it's not due to Lyme disease, and it's a more like dysfunction of their nervous system or just their digestive system, I don't really want to put herbs to try to kill stuff because I'm trying to nourish their body. But often you don't know. I mean, I would say there's a large percentage where the tests are inconclusive. And most herbs for Lyme disease are not very harmful. But I think it's important, even if they have Lyme disease, if they think they have Lyme disease, and you don't know because the testing is inconclusive, and they've never seen a rash or anything, or the tick. I still want to know the symptoms, because often I'm not treating the Lyme disease, I'm treating the symptoms of Lyme disease, the concentration or memory or joint pain, the headaches that are associated with it. So I think it's this whole harangue that I'm doing right now, I think the central point is that, often we try to figure out the symptoms to help alleviate that. And especially for people who come to herbalists, often don't know really what's wrong with them. They just know they don't feel good, and all the testing has come out negative. So I think it can be a boon to their health.
Can you think of anything in Western medicine that nourishes the nervous system? You've used that phrase a couple of times, and I've been trying to think, is there anything in like the modern medicine, I should say?
Well, I guess you would have to define nourish, because for many people, for instance, SSRIs like Celexa or Lexapro, am I nourished in her? Do they give that? I mean, the person might have better mental functioning and with minimal side effects. So, of course, people have very wide, they react to these drugs very differently. But for some people, they're helpful. And so maybe that's nourishing. I don't know. It seems different than herbs, but again, it's easy to think that things that are more natural are better, but that's just not true. I mean, nobody wants to eat poop, right? And that is a very natural product. We're falling down a deep. I mean, there's many things that are natural that are, should not be ingested or put on the body.
Right.
But I think a lot of people like myself, there is something really nice about being able to gather my own medicines, and there's just something pleasing about it. Yeah,
well, it does take in. It is kind of a personal preference because it just takes into account the whole person. There is definitely, obviously, this is the world that we live in. A lot of people who literally prefer a little pill jar, and they take that with their morning breakfast and out the door, and that's it. And then there are people who want to kind of engage in more of a practice with an environment, creating something, taking that into their body. It's kind of more of an experience. And obviously that's going to shift one's lifestyle in some way. If you're really trying to make your own medicine, that's already a lifestyle shift that you're making. Can you speak a bit about how do you see the nervous system functioning, or can you describe more about that idea of the overstimulated nervous system showing someone as depressed versus an understimulated nervous system? Because I do think we live in a bit of a mental health crisis, and it's something that I think about all the time for my own mental health. If I'm feeling quote unquote low, I question myself now, literally from your course. I question myself about like, am I actually like down, or am I actually kind of imploding?
Yeah. So there are some ways to know it, like both somebody very anxious and somebody very depressed. So a little bit of definition. So these are not the technical definitions, but a definition of anxious would be overstimulated, and a definition of depression would be deficiency or understimulated, right? Mm-hmm. So if we start there, because what's interesting is, right, the drugs that are called antidepressants, the SSRIs, the SNRIs, they're mostly used for anxiety. I mean, the majority of people I know who are on antidepressants are not depressed, they're anxious. So both people often don't want to get up in the morning because of dealing with the consequences of being alive, right? Dealing with all the stuff they have to deal with. But they will often show differently. So the anxious person usually has difficulty staying asleep, waking up and closing their eyes and trying to fall back asleep. But a depressed person often will actually be deep, might not have a refreshing sleep, but they will be in a deeper sleep, and they're much more lethargic. So when the anxious person gets up, often they're moving around a little bit easier. And what they're trying to do is just shutting off the brain, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the depressed person, it's just hard to raise the energy levels up. Now, of course, though, these are made up polarizations, right? I mean, people could have both of these. But most of the people that I see in the Ithaca Free Clinic are anxious. They feel way overstimulated. They can't shut their minds. They feel tense all the time. And so you might see that, like a depressed person might be more laid back, but maybe not in a comfortable way, more lethargic, while the anxious person might be stiffer. But people can go back and forth, and you don't have, it's not just one or the other.
I think all that's very useful for people to hear. I think that we don't even really discuss very good articulations of those states in daily life in your random news story about some latest drug or this and that. I mean, I think even just that phrase of being overstimulated or understimulated is a great benchmark for people to walk around and think about, because probably most people are in that overstimulated place just because that's the world that we live in with all the devices that we have and the kind of 24-hour news cycle and all these things. I think that's really beneficial. How would you, for someone, say someone's listening to this, they're inspired now, they've never really thought about herbal medicine, now they want to try stuff. Since herbal medicine does straddle this weird place of being both kind of pushed to the sidelines, and you can like go to Walmart literally and buy herbal teas, and I'm sure you can probably buy some valerian things at Walmart and CVS and all this stuff. How should somebody who's brand new, like where should they start? What should they do?
Actually, that's pretty difficult. So the first problem is, like, in order to treat yourself, you have to know what you want. And so when you go online, first, people the herbal industry is the same as the drug industry. People are making broad claims. They can't make the same claims because of legalities, but they can sure make it sound good. And it's just the herb industry. So not all people in the herb industry are bad, but many of them are the same players. They're just going to feed you a lot of bullshit so that you think their product is better. For somehow their valerian is better than some other valerian. So at this point, there's not that, what you have to do is go through a couple, I don't know, maybe don't use anything from the first page. So if you type like anxiety, like just ignore the whole first page because those are sponsored ads
right.
By people, but they're not necessarily bad. And then what I would do is if you look at formulas, so let's say one of the companies has a formula for anxiety, I would look to see what the herbs are in it, and then look at a couple of other formulas from other companies and see herbs. I would frankly avoid, as far as buying the brand, like I would avoid Walmart brands because they're not doing any research at all, right?
Right.
So it's not so much a degradation of the company. There's plenty to say there. It's more like these generic brands, like your supermarket brands, they're just going to copy another formula and they're probably not going to use the high quality herbs. There are some companies better than others. I don't want to in different companies because I'm not really into promoting them. But I think there, some do have higher quality than others, but it's not by how much money they pay for their ads or how fancy their advertising is. So in other words, I think it's difficult to do. I've been working on a database based on my experience. It'll be online and free, but it probably won't be ready for another 30 years. I'll probably put it up sometime next year. So if you're interested in that, but my goal is to make it like kind of just my experience. That's not really that helpful for now. I find it very difficult, frankly, to know what to use. I mean, you can go to just as an herb store, like Flower Power in Manhattan. You can go and talk to somebody and see if they're really willing to engage you. There are some online herbalists. That's another idea. But I think the thing to do is like if you're going to go online, which is where most of us get our information, is to just jump around and say like anxiety and read what different people write about it. Because there are some, I know a lot of herbalists who have a lot of clinical skills and they're online as well. But they're not going to show up quickly when you look up anxiety. They're going to be way down. So I would just like try to get out of company land, find individual opinions, and then just like write down the herbs that seem most notable for you. I would be wary of it's easy when something sounds good that it's correct, but often it's not. Often it takes a little bit more research. But for instance, with anxiety, there's lots and lots of herbs, and very few of them are harmful. So you can always just experiment with a good quality brand or make your own and see how that feels. But it's going to take a couple of weeks, right? You're not going to.
That's the other thing for people to understand. It really takes a couple of weeks for herbs. That's a big difference between modern medicine and herbal medicine. You can take an Ativan and have an experience right then, but valerian and all these other more nourishing ones, like you mentioned, blue vervain and passion flower, you don't feel anything from those until a couple.
Yeah. Or you take really large doses, and sometimes then the tincture will work because it's alcohol in there, and so you're getting. You should be careful, by the way. Tinctures are almost always an alcohol, unless you say alcohol-free. Right. So if alcohol is a consideration and you don't want it in your body, don't buy tinctures. Even a small amount of alcohol for some people can set them off. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think that's great advice, though. That's the advice I give people about learning to cook is like, look up a recipe, look at 3 different ones of the same thing, and then figure out, those are the main players. So I don't have parsley, but that person used basil, and I don't have this, but that person used that. And now I have my own recipe. So
I finally figured out, I've been trying for years to have hard-boiled eggs where the shell comes off easy.
Oh, yeah.
I finally found a recipe that the shell comes off easily. It's really simple, of course, and everybody's probably laughing, thinking how long it's taken me. But I've always done it where it just takes you get all those little flecks there. That's like the simplest possible recipe is hard-boiled eggs. Yeah, I think, if you're listening to this and you're interested, there's just a lot of really safe herbs. And actually, even the sponsored ads, they're pretty much always stay in the safe zone. So if you're just thinking, I just want to try something, you'll see herbs like for anxiety for Tulsi or Rose or Damiana. And occasionally people will have a stronger reaction than others, but usually still within the safe zone. If you're sensitive, so some people are just more sensitive. Like I'm the opposite. Like I need a lot of herbs to have any impact on my body. But I have students that even take small amounts of something and they can feel it and it can have a notable difference in them. It might make them tired, for instance. So if you know that you're more sensitive, just start with smaller doses.
Can you speak just a little bit about that, about herbs that are more dangerous or sort of, I just think that a lot of people really think that herbal medicine is like a lavender sachet, like under your nose. And I think, I remember we did our final projects in your class and a bunch of us did things with hops. And by the end of class, we were all stoned and it was hilarious. Literally, I remember we were all speaking really slowly. It was like an episode of Scooby-Doo or something. And it was it was just teas and lozenges and it was hilarious.
Yeah. So herbs like hops and valerian and kava can be very helpful for sleep. But the effect is if you're taking, let's say you're taking hops. So hops, it's all about how much you're taking and your body's sensitivity. So if you're a very anxious person, let's say you get anxious in social situations, and you're going to a party, if you take a small amount of hops, again, it depends on your reaction to it, it might help. You just get a little more relaxed as if you had a drink or something, and then you might feel more comfortable. But if you took a bunch, you're also just going to be, it's not going to make you drunk. It's not going to make you say weird shit that you wish you didn't say out loud. But you're likely to just feel tired, which is not that much fun in these social situations.
Right.
I would say kava, hops, valerian, those are some of the stronger herbs, but also some of the most of those for sleep. But again, I know people who can take just a lot of all those herbs with almost no reaction. I give them to patients and they do nothing for them. So. Yeah,
I know just with my own insomnia, I feel like I could guzzle those and hardly anything happens. And then sometimes they work immediately and it's, so who knows? My last question for you is about pain relief, because that's another place that I think herbal medicine is amazing, especially in my own experience for menstrual cramps. I love Jamaican dogwood, but I've used willow bark. I made a tincture of willow bark from your program that I think I still have because I made a ginormous jar of it. And that's an interesting one because you mentioned that you literally have some like straight up poisonous ones that are amazing painkillers that nobody should be playing with. Can you speak a little bit about pain relief and herbs?
So when you think about pain, you really just want to think, what kind of pain is it? So for instance, menstrual pain is a spastic pain or cramping pain. Muscle pains are often inflammatory pains. Headaches have a wide diversity of different kinds of pain signaling that causes them. Itchiness is another kind of pain. So I think the first thing is you start thinking, what is the problem? So if your knees hurt really badly, generally it's going to be inflammatory. It's also going to be osteo. You have just joints rubbing against each other. And then that's harder to treat, frankly, because you need to get some lube in there where the bones are meeting each other. So there's probably about 15 or 20 really good pain herbs that really divide them into categories. You have the kind that are poisonous, which I'm not going to go into. And then you have like general pain relievers, like CBD is a general pain reliever. Then you have anti-inflammatories, which might be good for some kinds of headaches or back pain or knee pain. And they would include things like willow or licorice or arnica. Then you have spastic pain or cramping kind of pain, which could be from the menstrual cramps or digestive cramps or passing a stone. And then you have things like cramp bark, which is well named, black haw, silk tassel. That's a plant called silk tassel, genus Garrya, Jamaican dogwood. Well, Jamaican dogwood is actually a different kind. So Jamaican dogwood is a plant that augments the usefulness of other plants. So Jamaican dogwood is a pain reliever in itself, but when you add it to formulas, it tends to increase the level of the formula. Also tends to be specific for menstrual cramps.
I found it to be amazing. Like that's one that I can take and 15 minutes later, I feel better.
Yeah, Jamaican dogwood is a really useful pain reliever. Then you also have things like skeletal muscle tightness. Then you have plants like pedicularis or black cohosh. So I think the first thing in addressing pain is like, what is causing my pain? Some stuff like fibromyalgia is very hard to know. That's probably a central nervous system disorder creating pain signaling in the peripheral, the outside nervous system. They could be harder to treat, but still sometimes herbs help. Here's the thing, like if you're not spending too much money, and don't buy a bunch of stuff at once, like you want to buy like a thing at a time generally, or one or two things, because otherwise you take 10 things and something works, and then you keep having to take those 10 things These might cost a couple $100s a month.
Yeah.
So you start simpler. You can find, you cycle through different herbs if that's possible for you. The problem with herbal medicine is that it's expensive, right? So it is very expensive and nobody covers it. There's no insurance anywhere. So while drugs are very expensive, if you have insurance, which many people don't, you will at least get some of it covered, whereas nobody's going to cover your herbs. And since you need to take a lot of them, if you just want to take echinacea because you have a cold or a flu, and you're paying, if you're downstate New York, you might be paying $10 for an ounce. You might go through an ounce in 3 days. You're really trying to get better. And so the way that I've worked with that is I'm a founder, and this is a promotional moment. There's no money involved. But 16 years ago here in Ithaca, we started a free clinic. It's not my clinic. A bunch of us helped start it. It has conventional medicine, doctors and nurses. It has an herbalist, now 2 herbalists. We have a chiropractor. But the reason that I really wanted to be a part is because one of the main impediments, one of the main problems with getting herbs is that people can't afford them. Right. And since you don't know if they work or not, it's even harder. Like, do I want to spend $10 on a bottle of echinacea, or I can spend $10 and get antibiotics that might have clearer definition of their use. Mm-hmm. So for the past 16 years, I've been giving away free herbs, plant medicines to people, so that people feel better, and people who want herbal medicine. When you come to the clinic, though, it's your choice. You can see the herbalist, you can see the doctor, the chiropractor. It depends what day you came and who you made an appointment. It's always free. So
yeah, that place is amazing. And you guys do virtual appointments too, so you can be just like So we do online appointments, but I never send medicines. None of us do. Yeah. So the one problem with, if you come to Ithaca, or somebody who can pick up your medicines and send them to you, that's a possibility. But I have a very strong, it's just too much trouble and too much money to people. But we do see people online. Yeah, it's amazing. So keep that in mind, my enormous audience. The last thing I wanted to say about that, you were saying something about all those. Oh, that you were defining all this type of pain. And I just want to highlight again, to me, the value of herbal versus modern medicine is, I'm not sure, anytime that I've gone to a doctor for pain, they might a little bit, they're asking questions. They're trying to find out if it's skeletal or like a muscle spasm, but there isn't necessarily that amount of gradation. I'm sure there's plenty of doctors out there who do, but I think most of the time it's really just here now, just take this quote unquote pain blocker, but you're describing all different kinds of avenues towards that pain, from something that helps to calm the nervous system to stop having that, sending that message of pain, to actually relaxing the muscles or stopping the spasm, or, all these different things, so that what is actually happening actually gets resolved, as opposed to someone who's just living on Advil for 20 years, or, certainly when I was a very young teenager, like 12, 13, with horrific menstrual cramps, they gave me these horse pill size acetaminophen, basically, that would also leave me almost drunk feeling and incapacitated. The quote unquote pain was gone, but I was so numbed out from it, I would have to miss school anyway. So what was the point of that? Whereas if I had had an herb that actually just addressed the pain issue, because, with that Jamaican dogwood, I can just I'm myself. It doesn't affect my brain. And it doesn't give you that drunk feeling of being on a painkiller. So I just wanted to put an underline under that, because I thought that was a pretty amazing list of where is your pain coming from. And it's something that I discuss with my own clients in with the structural work that I do, is just really trying to get a good description of what that pain is. When did it start? When does it come up during the day? Because of all the clues you can get from there.
Yeah. I do want to point out, though, that often people will take their herbal pain medicines for forever. The same thing, right?
Right.
So you can always, some pains are structural. You might have some damage to a nerve in your spine, and then without changing that, often it's not easy to change. People might take it. But I've definitely seen people get drunk taking too many tinctures, taking too much tincture at a time.
That sounds like,
and then their pain feels much better temporarily.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other topic. Well, I don't want to keep you anymore. I know you're very busy. Thank you so much for taking this time. And
my pleasure, Cadence.
I wish you so well in all your adventures, and we will link to your Instagram and the resources that we kind of named throughout this.
Sure. Also, I run an herb school. So,
that was what I wanted to say. Plug your herb school, please, because people.
So I'm only doing it. So I just turned 65 this year, which was my Medicare year, which means that I now get less expensive medications if I need them. So I run the school, the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine. If you go to the website, sevensong.com, and I'm only going to be doing it, right? I'm doing it. I'm not doing it this year. I'm doing it in 2024. Then I'm taking off in 2025, then probably again into 2026. I'm staggering it as I want to do other stuff as I have gotten older, while my body and brain still seem to be reasonably functioning. Anyway, that's a lot to say, but I run an herb school. I'm like this all the time. So if you're interested in a non-spiritual, cynical, sarcastic, potty-mouthed herb school, I'm one of them. I'm in Ithaca, New York. There's a 1 week in the month program, and then there's a 3-day-a-week program. They're both starting to fill up, especially the weekend program for 2024, if you have any interest.
And that's the one that I took. I can highly recommend that one. You will only see Ithaca in its most beautiful state, and you'll never know about Ithaca winters. And yeah, it's a great program. Seven Song is a great teacher, and everything he said is correct. Lots of foul language and sarcasm. Thank you so much.
Sure, Cadence.
And I would look forward to reading about all of your adventures.
Okay. Bye, everybody.